So as people still come in, I'd just like to welcome you to the webinar today. I suppose I'm Compare, so I'm Robbie Bennell, Vice President of Marketing at Precursive, and welcome to Precursive's webinar, Traditional Services Delivery is Dead. Intentionally provocative title, as you've probably guessed, but you know, it's meant to be provocative, gets the people going, as Will Ferrell says. So this month, you might have seen, I've been shouting at you guys enough. We've launched a playbook with some great contributors from Sage to Cognite, Infosys, Garwood Solutions, and some people from Precursive ourselves with the same title. And we created this content because we're starting to see blurred lines between services and success teams, particularly in the world of B2B tech and professional services, particularly when it comes to that onboarding process, that delivery process, and then ongoing customer engagement. So we decided to create content around it, and I'm very glad to be joined by some of those content contributors today, who I'll introduce shortly. But first, let's pop over to the agenda. This is what we'll be covering today. We'll be talking about the outcomes era, something you'll keep hearing from us at Precursive. It's framing our world at the moment, and there'll be several pieces of content coming out over the next couple of months around the outcomes era. So keep listening out for that buzzword. This is an interactive session as well, so please do comment in the tools below. Use the Q&A function of Zoom, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. And whilst the guest speakers have their own sections, this is very much a conversation, so we want to have your involvement. After the outcomes era conversation, we'll cover the key components of what a professional services organization looks like today, how best that organization can partner with customer success, and more importantly, perhaps why. And then we'll go on to explore how you can scale in this outcomes era. We'll be answering your questions throughout, but there'll be a couple of designated sessions for those Q&As. And at the end, I'll be going over a content roadmap, looking at some of the other things we're doing around this topic, and hopefully you guys can partner with us on that journey. But without further ado, let's move over to introduce our speakers, and we'll start with Alex.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning for folks joining. My name is Alex Farmer. I'm currently Vice President of Customer Success at Cognite, but I'll give you the short version of the long story, because my first role in my career was actually as an implementation consultant at a company called People Fluent, and then I moved to do implementation in a company called Fairsail, where John had the privilege of working alongside of me. And then, of course, managing. He was my manager as well later on. But after that, 6 months at Fairsail, I became our first customer success manager. So kind of made the pivot from professional services to customer success, grew with the business that was sold. Fairsail was sold to Sage, where John still is today. I'll introduce himself in a second. And then I went to join a company called IncoPro, where I ran a few teams, but in customer success and onboarding. And then now I'm at Cognite, which is a Oslo-based data operations software provider, where I run the customer success management function. And pleased to be here.
Great, thank you, Alex. And over to you, John.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're well. So I'm John Harrison. I am the VP of Services and Customer Success for Sage in the UKI. As Alex kindly referenced, back in 2014, we had the pleasure of being colleagues, where I joined a company called Fairsail to run professional services. And then in 2017, Fairsail was acquired by Sage, when again I had the honor of becoming Alex's manager and becoming the global vice president of services and success for Sage People. And then in 2019, I moved over to the more traditional side of Sage, finance, accountancy, HR, and payroll, where I'm currently the VP.
John, I have a few questions in the fireside chat about your performance review that you gave me a few years ago. So everybody's ready for that.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
The sparring has started. That's great. So moving over to our own CEO.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Jonathan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Precursive. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. And first and foremost, of course, thank you to Alex and John for their contributions to this white paper. as well as to our own Debbie Perot, our head of services. Hi, Debbie. Richard Cardwell from Infosys and Adam Mays from Garwood Solutions, who I think, like myself, are all very passionate about the world of B2B tech, all things professional services, and of course, customer success. So I think really what we're going to be exploring today is the shift in customer behaviors in this outcomes era, where I think, put simply, customers expect more value more quickly. So often it falls to the professional services and customer success teams to deliver on the value promises made in sales. I think we should always remember, though, that, frankly speaking, no one's buying software for the sake of buying software. They want to achieve a goal, right? They want to achieve an outcome, whether that's growth or whether it's cost reduction or whether it's efficiency savings or whatever it is that your value proposition delivers. And really, the value associated with that is going to be the material or monetary impact from that outcome, right? So I think, for example, time to value is one of the most common and important metrics across the companies that we speak to at the moment. And so I think it really, as Robbie said, one of the things that we're seeing is like the merging of these worlds, right? Of the most progressive companies recognizing that it takes an integrated effort from the services and customer success teams. We've got some footage here from one of Alex and John's previous meetings. So maybe you guys can talk us through perhaps the dynamics of that CS and PS relationship that kind of evolved between the two of you to begin with.
Yeah, I can maybe set the scene there. I don't know which one is meant to represent me. I don't know which one ends up winning, to be fair. So I can't decide which one I am here. But yeah, I mean, so John obviously can add some color to this as well. But we started as colleagues, and I was running the customer success management function. It was just me first of all, and then we kind of built the team as the business scaled. And I think the evolution for us was kind of being laser focused on our individual KPIs, but then starting to kind of see the cracks that were maybe forming from that individual departmental focus, and then really shifting our approach, I think, as we got to know each other a little bit better, to focus on the overall customer outcomes through the services delivery phase, and then into the value realization phase, renewal phase, et cetera. I think that was a really positive, well, I won't speak for you, John, but at least for me, mostly positive experience, and certainly a positive learning experience through that transition.
No, I think that's fair, and let's be honest, this video clip is not entirely unrepresentative of some of the challenges that we had, and I think, to put some color around it, when I joined Fireside, I'd come from a more traditional on-prem software business, and let's be honest, I'd come from a revenue world, right? PS was all about revenue generation, and customer success was kind of like, that'll look after itself. And I had a re-education, I think, and it took a fair while for me to kind of get my head away from that traditional embedded services mindset where revenue, billable utilization, keep people busy, fleece the customer, let's be honest, that mindset to this whole, right, well, it's about long term, it's about outcomes. And I think it's good that we probably had a couple of years of getting to know each other before I actually started to manage Alex. That's not to say some of our discussions weren't challenging, right? Because again, we have an element of goal conflict, when you've got that long-term renewal discussion versus, yeah, but I've got to pay for it. And how do I pay for it? I get the cash cow of services, right? So how do I balance to the two? So this is probably fairly representative of some of the journey we had.
I blacked out for most of it, John, I'll be honest. So I'll have to take your word for it.
Amazing. Cool. Well, we're gonna look at some of the dynamics of that in more detail as we go through. Certainly in Alex's section around partnering with customer success, but I think throughout we can riff on some of those themes. I think the first area in this piece that John kindly contributed to was unpacking some of the different elements of a professional services organization. So really over to you, John, to perhaps take us through what some of those components are, what they mean, what's important, etc., and we can go from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think when I was writing this, it really made me think about some of the perceptions professional services. And I think there's a misconception that in the current world, that B2B SaaS doesn't involve services, and that's not true. In my experience, certainly not for mid-market and larger customers. I think every company wants to make it easy for customers to buy from them and to stay. But there are barriers to entry, right? And how do we remove them? I think it's easy to say that, oh yeah, it's easy to buy from, it's easy to work from us, but actually it's never that simple when you look at the considerations you have to take into account when you're running a services org. You know, for example, do you take the same approach in a SaaS environment with professional services as you do with an on-premise business? Especially when you consider that most diversive theory of professional services revenues are bad and should be banished from a revenue mix. I think professional services revenues are not bad. It just depends how you get there. And that's kind of what we're going to try and unpack over this session. So the first thing really to think about is actually what are the pillars of professional services? I think what's become clear since the dawn of time is that successful projects are not just about tech, right? It's about people and processes. You know, the tech alone is not going to change a customer's business, right? The people, the process, the technology also need to change in order to bring that business value and benefit. So every business starts with different people and processes. So services is there to understand that starting point and help design and achieve the outcomes. But to do that, your PS organization needs to be set up for success. So here we've got, you know, the strategy and business model, the alignment with sales, how you work with partners, if you work with partners, process, and ultimately the metrics. So what we're going to do is just dig into these areas in a bit more detail.
Yeah, Robbie, can you just move the video, the pictures of the people down a little bit because it blocks the bottom right.
Robbie, you're killing me.
There we go. Yeah, there we go.
There we go. So, I mean, look, I'm not gonna go into everything in a huge amount of detail. Obviously, the playbook has a lot more information, but what is it? Just my screen, or is Robbie having a funny one, moving things around?
He's having a moment. He's all right.
It's jumping to the top automatically. Sorry, guys.
No,
People tend to want to see faces, but it's not behaving today.
So, Robbie, can you flick it onto the next slide for me? So, I guess the first box really I want to talk about is this strategy and business model. And one of my old bosses, well, actually, our joint old boss used to say to me, "What are you for?" And it was something you overtake personally. You understand in the context of what you're trying to achieve as a business. But that "what are you for" was really, really important. And I think it's important to establish what you're trying to achieve through professional services and how you support the wider organizational goal. I think often services is a mix of either get, grow, or retain. And I think being clear on this and your role really helps you understand how to deploy your resources, your organizational structure, and how you align to the wider business. I think companies selling products in the SMB marketplace can quite easily follow different operating models from those that play in the more enterprise space. And again, you can take that further from the services perspective because you've got SaaS platforms where the product is self-explanatory or plug and play, where users are onboarded through enablement, such as in-product help or e-learning or guided onboarding. But then you flip it to the more enterprise, you've got significant configuration required, ideally config and not code, let's be honest, but more user enablement, extensive product onboarding. It requires a level of subject matter expertise from professional services. So that for the embedded services org it's really important to consider this, is what's your role in the business? And I think those different operating models can achieve commercial and customer success in very different ways, which goes back to my point around professional services revenues are fine depending how you get there. But I also think as your business matures, your strategy is going to change. So always understanding the corporate mission and your place in the go-to-market model is absolutely critical. So Robbie, can you flick it on for me? So alignment with sales. This is always an interesting one, highly emotive, and probably where I used to spend most of my time, right? Sales sell the dream and we deliver the reality. The amount of times I've been into a customer or a prospect actually say, I really love the salesperson. Well, actually, you're the services guy, so you're going to tell me the truth. I'd be a rich man. But I think understanding why the customer is doing this project is really critical, what they're trying to achieve. So that engagement with sales is critical to understand if your PS function can actually achieve the desired outcome, and set that customer for success. So what we've done here is list a number of different things that you should be mindful of, but I'm going to pick on two areas. The first one is services getting engaged in the sales process at the right time, and does services always provide the statement of work? Okay, I think we've all been in scenarios where we just given that hospital pass and go, there you go, can you just deliver that? For me, there are three variables in every project, right? It's quality, timescale, and cost. Let's be brutally honest. I think quality, timescale, and cost are in that order on purpose. They're descending order of importance. If the order's ever changed, the project can get into serious trouble. So I think to expand that, and what does that mean? I think you've all heard the whole, we have to go live by the 1st of January, no matter what state the solution is in. But we can only ever spend £20,000. Okay. So I'm not saying that the timescales and costs are not important, but of course they are. But does the project really have to go live? And if there is a significant problem, does it have to be fixed post go live? Same with cost. If there's a major problem, then change control is there for a reason. If there's time to fix it when it goes wrong, there's time to do it right in the first place. And I kind of say the same thing to salespeople, is let's make sure the statement of work is right. Engage us at the right point in the process. So when we were at Fairsale, which became Sage People, we would probably get involved when a prospect was about 40% through the sales process. That's when the services guys would start to get involved with the conversation. And we would start to allocate resources when we got to about a 70% certainty and a commit to sign at a contract level. That's when we started to engage, really understand the scope, really start to understand the outcome. But also helped us manage the expectations of the customer and the salesperson, right? Because the salesperson will always come in and go, it can't go over 20 grand. Well, it can, if we've done the right thing at the right time and had the right conversations.
Yeah, and John, just to jump in, if I may briefly, whether it's the CSM or the services organization that's engaging with that prospect pre-sale, I think yes, you need to orchestrate it correctly, but it can be seen as a competitive differentiator in a major way. You have a sales rep who's built a positive relationship with a prospect, but there's a nervousness about signing a contract, right? And kind of coming in as the expert to say, hey, look, we're the experts. We're going to scope out we're going to own what we're going to deliver. And you have this kind of relay race of in the sales process where sales keeps running, but services or CS runs alongside. Really can reassure the customer, and frankly, I think increase close rates. So I think there's a real benefit here as well.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's something that to this day it's really important, is making sure that the concept of customer success is introduced early enough in the sales process, and why. I guess it expands on why we have executive sponsors, why we have service sales specialists, right, who understand the product, who understand the methodologies. And even now, so I run the organization, but I still sign off every statement of work on 2 of our product lines, which are the more complicated implementations. I want to make sure that if I'm on the hook, right, and I've got to deliver it and my team needs to bring it to life, I want to make sure that I'm the one that understands it, because I'm going to have to sort it out. So let's make my life easier. Have that meeting, hold sales to account, make sure you understand the scope. So, I mean, look, we could go on this subject for hours, right? The PS world always have a love-hate relationship with the sales team, but I think we can make it easier for ourselves. So, Robbie, can you flick on for me? I feel like Chris Whitty. So, delivery options. This is a really interesting one about partners. So I think I spoke earlier on around the importance of the business strategy, and working with partners is a key one, because there's a number of different ways you can do it. under the direct delivery model, where your direct team will deliver, working on a subcontract basis. So you sell on your paper and then pass through delivery. Or ultimately you push it all out to your partners to sign on their paper and deliver. I think it's really important you understand what's your longer term goal. Where do you want to go, and where do partners play to your strategy? There's a lot of different considerations. The first thing is maturity of your business. For me, when we were at Fairsale, it was very much, I never wanted to have a huge professional services function internally. If you look at the cost of just running a function like that, they're usually highly skilled, travel and expense, the list goes on. So the only way I was ever going to scale the business was to understand, well, actually, when is the right time for me to move to a partner delivery model, and what's that going to look like? And for me, the tipping point was probably around £1 to £1.5 million worth of services revenue a year. If I look at that, that was probably 8 consultants, and then the level of growth we were going through at Fairsale, we were growing, I think at peak 1,200% a year, Alex. Does that ring a bell with you?
Sounds about right.
We were growing fast, right? And I couldn't keep up. So there's no way I could continue as a startup, a scale up, to keep bringing in these expensive resources. So I had to move to the partner world. But then you've got to start to think about, well, what does a good partner look like? This for me was massive, was actually culturally, do these partners fit with our organization, our ethos, our customer success mindset? Or are they in it for the short haul? So are they similar in size? What are their commercial ambitions? Do they carry similar products? Are they going to commit? Are they going to reallocate their resource when we have a tough time and our pipeline dries up for a quarter? And then you start to take it even further and say, well, actually, what does good governance look like for a partner? How am I going to make sure they deliver these projects to the standards I want? Because ultimately, it's still my name across the top of the door, right? If it goes wrong, it's going to be a failed Fairsale Sage People product. So really working through the cost implications, the revenue recognition implications, cost implications. And to this day, in the Sage People product from a delivery perspective, there's only, in the UK, there's only 5 delivery partners who culturally really closely align to the way that business operates.
And I think, John, just to jump in briefly as well, your point about finding partners it's maybe a bit of a negative way to characterize it, but the balance of power is kind of mutually on the same plane, right? So I think one of the big reasons, as you've alluded to, for success at Fairsale was finding partners that were relatively new, wanted to, it wasn't the Deloittes or Accentures of the world, it was people who were small and wanted to grow with us. And I think that was a real reason for success. And then if we look at it from the perspective of customer success, it meant that they were more comfortable with, the CS team still coming in and working directly with those customers, and working, to renew the SaaS license, and not being seen as kind of some competitive threat where if we're targeted on revenue or services attach rate, getting somebody representing the business moving in alongside a partner could be seen as trying to take revenue. And that obviously, was not the philosophy, as you've alluded to. I'll also just briefly say that, for me, the challenge with customer success in a partner delivery model is about control. And I think I guess if there's another column on this slide, the easiest to manage is probably the row on the top, and the most cumbersome is the row on the bottom, where, I think, as I mentioned before, the value-added reseller model with, truly partner-led engagement, there's a little skepticism as to how customer success should be involved dealing with that customer directly, or if we need to kind of roll out a separate partner success model to essentially use the customer success tactics and artifacts that we're building, but teach the partner how to do that themselves as well. But I think, as you say, we started with the first one and then went down this list as we scaled as a business. And I think that was intentional and intelligent, because it meant that we could scale the CS function to be able to start providing partner success when we were bigger and it made sense.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that the partners that we're talking about here were delivery only partners rather than the traditional VAR. Because when you get into the whole world of resellers selling your product and they own the renewal, but you still want to maintain control, that's a whole other world that we haven't got time to talk about.
It's the fourth row.
Yeah, that's the fourth row kind of over here with a red hot potato around it. So
We've got a great question from Laura, and I think now's the time to answer it. So she's asking, are you considering value-added resellers as part of the partner-led with expert services?
I think you can do, absolutely. It's a model that we've looked at, certainly, is expert services. So we've got centers of excellence whose role now is to really engage and enable these partners around technical, soft skills, methodology, but also understanding that actually there's a service that you can provide as a product owner and author. So it could be around QA of a configuration, it could be validation of a design document, it could be additional training for new employees. So absolutely, I think VARs can fit into that. But you also have to understand that over a period, that model, if you rely on it as a revenue line, is going to fall away, right? Because actually over time they're going to go on that roller coaster. They're going to learn and then they're going to fall away. So that's where your governance layer comes on top to make sure you're still checking how they deliver, even when they're not coming to you every 5 minutes for help and support.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so this one here, operations. This is a really interesting one. I think professional services experience pressure from all over the business. People always want a bit of professional services, be it pre-sales, operations, sales, marketing, product, but only a few organizations really think about how to navigate what the systems are required, what the technology that's needed to remain competitive. And I think there's a big question mark that over the past year has probably been answered given the climate around whether the industry is significantly transformed enough through digital disruption, right? And whether we, this constant concept that I always remember, you have to be on site, you have to be seen, otherwise what am I paying for? Whereas now that's moved on. And I think as a PS leader, process and technology is an area that you're always going to spend too much time on. The complex nature of running services business means that you have to be across culture and risk and people and ops and technology and strategy and sales and marketing and escalations. And you can't really afford the time to ensure that as a business, you've got a really solid business ops function taking care of the tech stack and processes you need. So I think for me, we know effective management resources is a huge impact on margin and project success. So I would suggest that looking at your ops function, particularly around resource management, is critical. And make sure that your resource team has a seat at your leadership table. Because for me, these guys are the glue that holds it all together. If the resource team are not aware of the current projects, upcoming pipeline, the likelihood of winning, and then testing that sales forecast, then they're not doing their job. They're not doing you justice. So just as you would expect your ops team to know the delivery schedules, resource allocations, utilization, revenue, skills matrix, KPDs with key person dependencies, they're not doing their job. They need to be shoulder to shoulder with the sales ops. So finally from me, because Alex talks forever and he's given enough time, we need to look at the metrics. And the traditional services metrics you see here, I'm sure will be familiar to the majority of people. But actually, we've got to think new world. And we've got to think about, well, actually, what does customer success mean and how does PS play a part? So you've got to start thinking about outcomes. So referenceable customers, making sure you come out of that first phase of project delivery and make sure that customer is going to stand up and shout from the trees. Make sure you manage your red, yellow, and black accounts. And that should be done collaboratively with professional services and customer success to make sure that, that first phase is good. But when they're in that second phase and customer success is managing them, the professional services guys who are supporting are really aware of the state of that account. Productive utilization is an interesting one. Some people will look at it, some people won't. But making sure the guys are busy doing the right things rather than just busy. These next two are something that I've really focused on over the past year is around training and enablement. So actually making sure that our training is reaching the right people in an organization, but also what's the impact of that training on your ARR and churn. We know that if we don't enable, make people self-sufficient, they will leave. So that's a huge metric. And finally, improving time to value. How can you make it easier? How can you make it quicker, faster? You know, HR directors do not want to come to me and say, I want XXX. They want me to go, if you do this, you'll get that outcome. And I can do it much, much faster. So the days of those 3-month discoveries and design processes, they're gone. It's all about how quick can you get it in. So on that note, I think I'm done.
We got
Off the hook.
off the hook. Well, we got a number of questions, so let's try and rattle through these. Great session, great section, John, and Alex. Great commentary as well. So from Tim Goff, so the hospital pass. So would you want the sales team? So to John on the hospital pass reference to being past the SOW, would you want the sales team to be delivering those SOWs? I think Tim is the...
No, because God, it's a horrible thing to say. And if any of my colleagues are here, I'm sorry, but do I trust salespeople enough? I've worked with salespeople that will sell their grandmother for a signature. So therefore they're going to put whatever they want to put on a statement of work. So I would much rather my team go in there and validate it. That's why we have service sales guys, right, who can scope and understand the product.
Yeah, Chris Roush, who was both of our manager at Fairsale, and we both joined, used this expression called healthy tension. And it's the right way to kind of run a business where you have conflicting KPIs, right? Sales wants to close deals, and services and success need to make sure those deals are sustainable, and we're able to renew them, keep customers satisfied. So that healthy tension, it's, as much as it can be like a bit of a confrontation, I like to look at it as a bit of a healthy tension between the two departments to make sure that we're just keeping a constant check on one another, which then leads to your business, right?
Yeah, totally.
I'd add a comment to that for Tim. So one of the things that I think I've seen, my background was in services prior to helping set up Precursive. And I think one of the things that commercial teams are always needing is a better way to answer the question, what happens when we start, right? Of communicating what that implementation or that customer onboarding looks like in a way that makes sense to the customer. Very often that's not an SOW actually. It's what does the onboarding look like? What is the process? What's the timeline? What are the people that we will need on our side, and how much effort do we need there? That's the kind of reassurance they get, and then a technically orientated SOW, right?
I agree, and I think that comes around to making sure you're involved in the sales process at the right time. And to that point I made around the customer saying, you're the services guy, I trust you, because you're going to bring it to life and say, look, they're going to tell you that you can do this with one person, but the reality is you are going to need people testing from different perspectives for this amount of time. You're going to need SMEs during the design process, So I think you're right, John. I think that provides a level of comfort.
Cool. We've got a number of questions here which are probably more related to the CS partnership, so we'll maybe hold some of them to the end. So this is a nice simple one. How much time would you allow your staff for training? What percentage?
That's a great question. That's a great question. So how much time, I would guess, I think for me, it depends on what's your internal utilization target that you've managed to negotiate with your business. Again, something that our former boss used to say is the way to beat a target is to get the right target. So from a utilization perspective, what can you afford? What's going to cover your costs? What's going to make sure they're busy to give you the time to make sure that they are freed up? And I think a lot of it comes down to how you train as well. You can do bite-sized training, you can give development days, you can give a percentage of time, but people learn in different ways, right? So I think that's a really hard question to answer without understanding your internal targets. But I think get the right target, you create the time and space.
Yeah, and ask your staff how much they're getting at the moment, right? Find out how much they feel they're actually getting. There's some data around, for example, like a minimum of 4 hours a month as a development goal for individuals. So there is some good data out there around that. Good question, which I'm going to put to Alex from Andrea. If you have a traditional established sales culture, how do you as professional services and a CSM break into that sales cycle?
Great question. I mean, I guess one of the answers is it depends on how receptive your executive team is to kind of making the decision for all of us, right? I get I think another way to kind of ensure that we're not just throwing SOWs and contracts over the fence and dealing with it, is to use data to kind of demonstrate what we can't compromise on. So one of the things that I'm not sure we mentioned explicitly in the checklist was around staffing and using that as a compelling event for sales folks to A, forecast accurately, and B, get deals signed sooner, right? So obviously you're not running a huge bench if you're running any bench at all in the services organization. So if this deal slips by 4 weeks, that means that we're not going to be able to actually start the project for 8 weeks. And that's not me, punching through the wall to tell sales to do their job differently. It's me telling a fact and using data to demonstrate that fact, right? And for me, I think that's that removes any kind of personality subjectivity and simply says, this is the data and this is the reality, so we need to do something about it.
And that's something we still do to this day, actually. So we get on a call with the sales guy and the prospect and say, when do you want to go live? And they usually say, where are we today? The middle of February? Right, they'll say, we want to go live on the 1st of May. And then you go, right, so what's your business calendar? Right, who's going on holiday? And then you kind of plot that down. You go, right, okay, so to do this, let's work back. And then all of a sudden people go, I haven't got enough time. You go, no, you haven't got enough time. So you need to sign now, or you need to slip your go live date.
Yeah, and I think, that, and then what we mentioned before about having a CS and a services representative in the pre-sales process as a differentiator to close more deals. You're not aligning it as I'm going to tell you how to do your job. I'm here to help you do your job. And then the after effect, of course, is the customer is more successful.
Yeah. And here's a couple of quick tips as well, Andreas. So if you run a sales forecast in Salesforce or whatever your CRM is right now, there will be a load of upsell and cross-sell deals linked to an initial deal, right? And if you want to get the sales team's attention, pretty straightforward. You present them 2 stories. Story number 1 is that deal you closed where the post-sale experience went badly, right? And that customer churned, right? And that maybe impacted your comp, which is quite common, right? Or option number 2 is, right, we have a smooth transition into professional services and customer success. The customer's really happy within several weeks or months, whatever the timeline is, and they buy more from us and they advocate on your behalf with other customers, right? And that's really the contrast that you can tell there. Conscious of the time, we're going to answer all of these questions, by the way, in a follow-up Google Doc, and we'll deal with some later on, and I'm sure the guys will be happy to stay on. Shall we, though, move into the wonderful world of customer success and partnerships? Over to you, Alex.
Sure. Yeah, we can jump in, and I would say I'll be brief, but I am self-aware, so I'll do my best, but possibly unlikely. But there's a lot of good questions coming in I'd like to make sure we have time for. So when Jonathan asked me to contribute to this ebook, or playbook, I should say, I'm sure, Robbie, if you flick to the next slide, that he didn't expect a bootleg nursery rhyme that I wrote after a few glasses of wine. And that'll make sense on the next slide. But I think the fundamental thing, the hypothesis I want to kind of present here is that we need to minimize handovers. And, if obviously, my background is in high touch engagements. So the plug and play relationships and deliveries that John was mentioning are not something I'm so familiar with either. But I see, organizations working with the sales function, they hand over to a services organization, and then the CSM will show up after the 1 to 3 month implementation is complete, right? And if we accept for a second that accidents happen at handovers, that's at least one handover too many in my view. So I wrote a lovely nursery rhyme style analogy that I'd love to share with you all today, because I think it really encapsulates the right approach when it comes to staffing post-sale and how CS and PS can work together to help customers ultimately achieve their goals. So give me a bit of leeway here as I explain this, and I promise, get more concrete in just a second. So the overall kind of hypothesis here is that the sales team will sell something to the customer, and ultimately they're going on a road trip to their overall value or business goals, right? Customer wants to go from A to B. That's why they procure software to solve a business problem. There's multiple options, right? if we don't have customer success engaged day 1, day minus 30, right, in the pre-sales process, you will essentially have a customer sat in the back seat of the car. You've got the services organization driving the car, building out the solution. And at some point, the services team is going to get out of the car, and then the CSM is going to hop in the passenger seat with the customer driving, right? And then, the customer is going to look around and say, hang on a minute, who are you and how are you involved with my implementation or my outcome? And that to me is the wrong approach. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that this can be much more well coordinated. So let's kind of put this in a much more positive light if the CSM is involved on day 1. Car shows up, you've got the delivery team, the implementation consultant in the driver's seat, maybe the engagement manager in the passenger seat. And then for me, the CSM should be sitting in the back seat of the car next to where the customer is going to get in, right? CSM looks at the customer and says, hello, welcome. I'd like to introduce you to the services delivery team that are going to be taking you down the first phase of your journey to value. And that's where they kind of step back. They set the scene, but they're there observing and listening. And then maybe at some point, there's a few speed bumps along the road. And the CSM leans over and says, hey, customer, I know, I spoke to the sales rep and I know you're trying to achieve these goals. Do you feel like we're doing okay here, right? What's our progress? And they start to kind of just ever so slightly start to show the customer, instead of just telling the customer, their role once the services organization leaves the car. Right. So for me, there's a very kind of nicely coordinated journey that we can allow our customers to go on. We're not stepping on anybody's toes, but we're showing the customer, not telling the customer about what the customer success role will be once the implementation is completed. So the last image that maybe I'll leave you with is when, let's say, for example, the car pulls over, maybe to a gas station, and then the professional services folks leave the car. Either there's a very nicely well-coordinated change. Customer starts driving themselves, CSM sitting in the passenger seat, helping them, chart their path forward. Or the customer peels off in a cloud of smoke, and the CSM is sprinting behind, trying to jump in the car to catch up, right? And then, of course, have to turn to the customer and say, hey, so tell me everything that you went through on your journey so far.
Alex, can I interrupt you for a second?
Well, I finished, John, so you may interject.
Oh, perfect. So how do you cope when you have an overzealous CSM who potentially is trying to drive the car, and the professional services guy is kind of saying, stop trying to change gear for me, right? I'm still kind of going down this path. You and I both know we've had experiences where, God bless customer success, they've kind of gone, no, do this. And the professional services guys know he doesn't know what he's talking about.
So how do you a flashback?
Yeah, exactly. I have no idea what you're referring to whatsoever. I mean, you're spot on. And I think for me, the most important thing is all of that happens below the waterline, right? We have to be really intentional about showing the customer and not just telling the customer who does what. One of the things that I struggle with sometimes, and at Fair Sale, we struggled with a little bit. Hello, former colleagues, if you're here. We hired all of our CSMs from the professional services pool. They sure got sick of being managed by John and jumped over to my team. But the challenge was that they knew, sometimes potentially better than the new consultant who just joined, how to solve the problem. And you had to be very, very focused on, I know you can fix the issue and you want to, but what's the impression that's going to give the customer? Right. And essentially ensure that just because we can fix it doesn't mean we should, because then, and I'll come on to this in the next slide, might establish the CSM as kind of glorified support or an extra professional services person. And that's, of course, a challenge in execution.
Yeah.
So I'll use that as, I guess, a good segue here. And I think some of the pitfalls that the reason why this hypothesis to me is so important and the pitfalls of having multiple handovers in a high touch implementation. I think the first one is about value and what I'll call the value vacuum, right? Sales is all pre-sales. The sales process is about telling the customer, hey, this is the value that you can achieve by becoming a customer of ours. These are the problems that we solve, right? And then, services usually comes in and they start asking the customer how they want to configure the product, right? It's a very kind of, we're building and implementing something that should relate back to that value case, that business case, right? But because we get so kind of in the weeds about the technical capability of the tool, there's nobody, in my experience, kind of carrying that baton forward of the value layer, right? And then, if the CSM comes in 3 months later when the implementation is over and we want to talk about value, it's a very kind of jarring experience where we went from hypothetical value to delivery to realized value without any kind of red thread of their overall business goals through the customer journey. So to your point, John, making sure that we stay in our lanes, so to speak, really butchering this analogy now. I think we're good. But making sure we stay in our lane and show the customer in the delivery process what the CS role is all about is a really good opportunity to kind of ensure that customer has one eye on their overall business goals throughout the delivery process. Okay. The second here is about the executive sponsor. I procure software every so often, and will kind of be the decision maker or exec sponsor for that procurement. And, we go through so speaking from experience, I guess, you go through a procurement cycle with a very in-depth RFP, and you finally select the solution, you get the contract signed, you put it through your procurement system, and it's done. And oftentimes the executive sponsor has a million other things to do and goes immediately to focus on the next project or maybe the next fire, right? And if the CSM, who's meant to be taking the executive relationship from the sales rep, at least in kind of the model that I think is the right approach for most organizations, the executive sponsor is gone in a week. And if the CSM comes back a month later or 3 months later and wants to start talking about value, you completely missed an opportunity to build the relationship or strike while the iron is still hot, right? The executive sponsor is off thinking about something else completely. And then you want to do your first executive business review with the customer. That executive sponsor doesn't really know who you are and might not show up. So you really miss an opportunity there, in my opinion. And then the final two here, I alluded to the third one, John, when I answered your question around the CSM becoming support. If the executive sponsor is absent and we're not engaging with them from day zero and kind of taking that baton from sales to have that executive relationship, CSM comes in after go live, says, hi, I'm the customer success manager. Even the longest hypercare phase, the best training, there's still, challenges, issues after an implementation has gone live, right? We might have a 6-week hypercare, but still we're going to find stuff we want to change. And if you come knocking on the door saying, hey, I'm here to talk about your ROI and the value you've realized from our solution, the fire that's burning for that person is probably not about value realized. It's about this button doesn't do what I thought it did, and my people are coming to me telling me the product's broken. So, you lose the CSM essentially has to dive into that immediately because services has left. And then you kind of take the bait as becoming this glorified support representative to solve problems instead of talking about overall success of the organization with your software. And I think the last thing for me is about quantifying ROI. And I think this is where we can really partner the best between CS and professional services. Yeah. You have a discovery document, and if you dive right into features and functions, right, and just kind of go through the usual scripts in an onboarding engagement with the customer, and then 3 months later show up and want to talk about return on investment, you lose the context, but you miss the opportunity to, as part of the SOW and services contract, build in measurement of value, right? If the customer is here to, increase cost per revenue per head by X%, if as we saw at Fair Sale, the reporting and dashboard module was usually the thing that got de-scoped immediately because, you can figure that out later. We need to build the guts of the tool. And it meant that there was a huge uphill battle to climb 3 months later after the implementation to try and quantify the value. So taking their business case in the discovery process and the delivery process, say, we're not going to de-scope this. These are the ways that you are going to measure value month on month with our product. And really kind of bringing that to the front of the process, connecting the delivery to the value is a real missed opportunity that I think sometimes you lose by laser focusing on some of these more traditional services metrics.
I think that's really important, Alex. It's something that you and I learned actually, and we introduced between us actually at Fair Sale was this concept of customer success plans. Actually start in the pre-sales process and live with that customer throughout their entire life cycle. because those pre-sales guys, they're gonna configure something in a demo that you're gonna have to recreate later on, which is going to be part of the ROI business case, for example. So understanding that journey from day dot all the way through to the 3-year, 5-year renewal, I think is fundamental.
And I'll just conclude here. This is my last slide, and maybe I have stuck to my brief of being brief. You'll have to tell me later. But I think we're kind of maturing that concept at Cognite at the moment, where we're working on customer success plans for every customer, focused kind of on their overall vision, and then we'll have quarterly goals for how we're going to get further in achieving that vision. And sometimes, especially with highly configurable products or more complex products, that's more services revenue. You're not targeting an attach rate, but there's upsell opportunities in saying to the customer, keeping this momentum going around, you're trying to achieve X. And if you're not able to achieve it yourself, that's okay. We have this services offering, this bundled subscription of kind of premier enablement. And you can really start to shift the model so that regardless of who's doing the delivery, whether it's the customer or a services organization, you're focused on overall value, as opposed to sign this SOW, we'll deliver this piece of functionality. It's working back from the value story to the delivery instead of from the product up to the value story. And I think that direction of travel and momentum is incredibly important to shift.
I think that's really great stuff from all of you, but thank you very much, Alex, for the input from the customer success side. And so I'd like to start with some of those customer success related questions that we've been receiving, if that's all right. So we've got one from Moore. If the CSM is involved from the beginning, would you still have a project manager or a professional services manager role to manage the professional services piece?
That's a very relevant question, actually, for conversations we're having now. I mean, I guess maybe I should get the caveat of all caveats out of the way first, which is it depends on your business and your product. Obviously, the more complex the product and the delivery is, the more roles you probably need. My opinion is that yes, for the most part, assuming you have the number of heads and to justify it, because it goes back to that comment about value layer and delivery layer. The challenge you have with a project manager without kind of a separate engagement or project-centric escalation points is that the CSM is that role. And if the CSM is that role, they're not able to start talking about value. They have to come in sometimes when the project may go a little bit askew and kind of wear that project hat and not stay in their lane. So at that point, we're not showing the customer that we're all about them achieving their overall goals, which I think is more detrimental to the relationship than helpful. So I think that's, without knowing obviously more details, for me, it's very important to have those two separate lanes and also escalation points within those lanes. And John, obviously, as you remember, at Fairsail, we had the engagement manager role that would step in when projects were challenged. Yeah,
I also think there's an important point here as well, is that we have to remember that the CSM will traditionally have somewhere between 20 and 40 accounts they're looking at depending on your business. Yeah. So they won't react quick enough. In reality, they will not react quick enough during a project for most customers. So to your point in staying in your lane, I think that's a valid point as well.
And we've got one more CS related one before we can probably loop back to some of the former PS questions. So what are your thoughts on having the CSM perform the TPM, I don't know what that is, but hopefully you do, role during the deployment?
I'm going to guess that's technical project manager, but I could be way off here. And if so, I think we can maybe answer that previously, around having splitting the lanes together, but feel free to clarify in the chat, whoever asked that question.
Great. And some more PS related ones. Someone's saying, loving the new KPIs back for the new service metrics against the traditional ones. So I guess this is a question for anyone, but for John maybe. Would you still consider PS a profit center operating at least break even?
Good question.
Great. Yeah, love that.
And a controversial question. And I think this speaks to the nub of this entire debate, which is how do you get your professional services revenue and what's your professional services function for? And the journey I've been on over the past 7 years probably is professional services and actually learning services, to a question that Matt asked earlier on, actually is just an enabler to recurring revenue. Actually, if we can remove cost as a barrier to entry, therefore revenue, and actually get that project implemented as fast as possible to a high quality, achieve those outcomes, then actually all you're doing is making it easier to generate recurring revenue. So for me, and I don't think my boss is on here, it's a cost center.
Also depends on the company though, right, John? It depends whether you got some private equity backers who
well, that's a really good point.
Profitability in a very different way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that goes back to the maturity of the business, right? You know, I can afford to say that now. I couldn't have afforded to say that in 2014.
Yeah. I think if we just quickly take the flip side of that, though, obviously investors are looking at services margin as well as gross margin of the business and services margin of projects, like sometimes quite heavily. But I think we have to look at the flip side, which is if I'm trying to run it as a profit center, what behavior does that drive, and how does that maybe negatively impact ultimate customer success and lifetime value? So for me, if we can make that business case and connect those two things, then it's maybe an easier question to answer. But I think it also demonstrates some of maybe we need more VCs and PE folks to watch your section, John, because I think this is still something that is maybe early stage in the shift. And I think I'd like to think the normal SaaS metrics change to reflect that as we more mature. B2B SaaS matures. The metrics mature with it.
Yeah, and it goes back to the underlying tone. I know we kind of said Alex and I sparring all the time, but that was the problem. Fundamentally, you take it back to we were trying to stay in our respective lanes, and I had to make revenue. He had to keep them. So, there's so many different ways you could answer that question.
We'll stay on, guys, and answer some questions if people need to jump off this call, but we're going to run through some of these questions, if that's all right, Alex and John, for like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I charge extra for that, Jonathan, but yes, it's fine.
100%, mate. 100%. I think one additional comment on that is like understanding the value of an hour of PS is really important in your business. So for example, if an hour of PS is going to help you renew a customer that's $100,000 in ARR, right? And you're in a business that's getting a 10x multiplier, it's pretty easy to convince your CFO, your CEO, or whomever it may be, right? That's $1 million in enterprise value that you've created through that hour of PS, right? So it's reframing the way I think organizations think about the world of services, and it speaks to that new metrics piece. Now, there's a good question in here that links to that, which is from Matt. Hi, Matt. Matt's going to be coming on our podcast, I think, which is great. But Matt's asking about training and whether you would, let's have a look here. Where's the question? Whether you would charge for training as a part of PS. I think it was.
So I think that's a great.
Is training/education part of the PS offering? Lots of PS offerings do not want training as it's largely not profitable enough. And I think given your training reach metric, John.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really good question. And actually at Fairsale, we did charge for training, but it was never a revenue line per se. And now, where in the business I run now, we actually don't charge for training at all, because actually it's seen as an enabler. Yeah. It's seen as a necessary way, to the point I made earlier on about that anti-churn activity and that product and feature adoption. Actually investing that time up front. The analogy I always use is around my iPhone. I use 20% of what the thing can do. If someone trains me on how that 80% is going to change my life, man, I'm just going to take as much training as I can get. So, don't put it behind a firewall, make it accessible, and I think it will make all the.
And I think it goes back to what I mentioned before, the cost of doing it the old school way, so to speak, right? If the it's still true today that CSMs can sometimes dive into escalations post implementation. If there's a problem, they may spend their time on the one red account that's burning. And if I had free training and customers were able to enable themselves as a CSM, I might have fewer red accounts and then can spread myself over my entire book of business and then potentially not lose that one big renewal that I didn't have time to pay attention to. So all of these things definitely relate. I think one more point I'd make just on the Fairsale example is what training was not a line item, and what it meant that this customer success team could do in challenging renewal situations was discount training by 100%.
Yeah.
It time and time again. So, you want a cost reduction in your contract. Unfortunately, we can't do that. I appreciate there have been a few bumps in the road. This was very rare, obviously. But here's training that has a sticker price of £5,000 for, 10 members of your team. But we'll discount that to 100%. So that's £5,000 worth of value that we gave back to you that kept our renewal rate flat at 100%. And didn't impact margin because it was, kind of reported out separately. And that was a real reason, I think, for a real differentiator in terms of our ability to kind of allay customer concerns when there were challenges.
But and again, a recent example here, we've gone through 4 months of our financial year, and by removing that barrier of cost for our learning services, we've had 65,000 customer learning engagements in 4 months. Now that's in our small segment business, right? But you've got all these small business owners who are coming out of COVID going, what the hell do I do? Go, I don't care, just go and absorb it, go and learn, go and take what you need. And it could be around product, it could be around COVID, it could be around general business skills. So there's so much value to taking that approach.
With regards to, so there's a number of questions here around CS and PS being parts of the same team, different departments, and whether you have business models that separated them out. Discuss.
I mean, I could jump in. Obviously, the organizations that I've worked for are much smaller than Sage. Well, I worked at Sage for a time, but been in startups most of my career. I think whether they're the same or different teams I think it's important that they're differentiated. If it's a more high touch model, you don't want CS to become the everything department. But I think the more important thing is, who do they report to? And do they report to the same ultimate stakeholder? And I think that's where you get into some challenging situations, where if CS reports into maybe a CRO role and chief revenue officer, and PS reports into a different role, that's where you kind of lose some of the collaboration, because you're focusing customer success a little bit more on revenue. There's different models and there's pros and cons. My belief for most businesses, especially when you're scaling, is to focus, for scaling businesses, to focus teams on new customer acquisition, and then teams, both revenue and non-revenue, on post-sale execution and value realization. So that would mean that the professional services leader and the customer success leader would report into the same person, or get managed by that person, but we don't need to go through ancient history.
I mean, I have both functions reporting to me in Sage, and actually my PS director and my CS director in many ways have some of the shared goals, for example, around referenceability.
Yep.
So there's benefits. There's some clash there, but if you do it the right way and they can see a mutual benefit around setting that customer up for success, I think it could work. And again, you can kind of loop learning services and customer support into that as well, but then that's where you kind of start to get some gray areas too.
I think you both spoken about the fact that in your careers you've seen the conflict in metrics, right? Where those organizations and others are incentivized in different ways. For me personally, what we see the best companies doing is step one, realizing that CS and PS have a shared mission, right? They have a shared mission, which is helping customers to realize their outcomes. If you realize your outcomes and you deliver value, which by the way is linked to another question there about the key metric in onboarding phases. In our customer onboarding benchmark survey, we run it every year across hundreds of companies. One of the questions we asked is, what is the metric, or how do you measure that, a customer is onboarded, right? And what we saw in the survey from hundreds of companies, it was all technically orientated. It was all, product adoption, user adoption. There wasn't people commenting on value, right? So and it's the hardest thing really sometimes to quantify and get to, but I think that time to value is the key metric for onboarding, at least in my experience. It's what everyone's aspiring to. It's not launch, by the way. Time to value is not launch. And you need to understand and communicate the value in the customer's language. If you're doing those things well and at scale, you are going to generate recurring revenues, right? You're going to generate that recurring revenue, be it through license revenue or even frankly via services revenue, right? So I think that's the shared mission that many organizations aspire to, at least in from my vantage point. Robbie, any other There's lots of questions here, so we can.
Lots of questions, so we'll try and do a quick fire if we can. We've already kind of mentioned about, whether it's a revenue driver, but Kevin's asked, do you see that the way PS is priced and then offered to customers changing, or how do you see it changing? Particularly important if this is revenue going to be added value to your own business. It's a long question in terms of.
Stay away from cap TMM. If you do fixed price, put 30% on top. One of the things we're looking at now is rolling up professional services into the license cost, so it's bundled. So essentially, it's presented as a free implementation, but actually you're recognizing that over a longer term. Mm-hmm. So I think it will change. I think a lot of it depends on your revenue model and revenue mix.
Yeah, just quickly for me, I think one thing that from my vantage point that's really helpful is this ability to kind of escalate beyond the scope of customer success. So let's say the implementation is over, customer is struggling to get, they got their first value. We call it time to first value, by the way, because of course more value can be generated on the platform, and it kind of has a momentum shift, at least in the eyes of our customers. Haven't trademarked it yet, Jonathan. You guys can have that one.
That's new dashboards, mate. So thank you for that.
Very good. But 6 months in, customers clearly not getting much value from the tool that we spent a lot of time building, and they're not able to achieve their goals. CSM, has 40 accounts, maybe more if it's a lower touch model. What can they go and give that customer or discount for that customer that uses the expertise of the professional services organization, but helps to right the ship, call in the quote, big technical guns. Some organizations call it a technical account manager, but ultimately it's a similar motion to professional services. One thing that we've explored I've explored in previous roles is kind of a subscription bundled element where you'll have a few seats on a training course. You'll have a couple of hours a month for a period of months to ask questions to our support team that's dedicated, and then also we'll scope out a small package of work to kind of fine tune the tool. And that's a really nice lever the CSM can pull. And also can discount, similar philosophies of the training discount I talked about before. So I'd like to see more of that to kind of make kind of implementations we think are massive SOWs that cost a lot. But how can we make it more of a bite-size panacea to customer problems?
And we've got a good one from Charles. So during the discovery phase, what role do you see services playing in working with the prospect themselves?
Huge. Has to. Absolutely has to, because if you don't, you're never going to understand the customer's mission, their ROI. One of the big things for me is, why am I doing this project? Because then I'm going to build it into my design. I'm going to build it into the questions when I meet with those SMEs. As I go through the business, I want to understand what their pain points are. And you're never going to get that from an RFP document or secondhand through a salesperson who thinks they know the business, so that's why that early engagement in the sales process is so important, because you get to understand the personalities as well as the business. And then, over the life of that, then you're transferring that, you're transferring that information to your CS guys, right? So I think the more time you can spend with that customer, that the sponsor, the coach, those SMEs you're going to be working with, because you also have to remember that sometimes the people you're going to be working with, they're not procuring this system. They're being told to put it in, and they might not even want it. So the more time you can spend with that business, kind of going on that journey, collaborating, the better.
Yeah, I think just quickly, for me, I think you could replace professional services with CS in that example, depending on the organization. That's controversial. I think that's triggered John a little bit back to 4 years ago. I don't mean that we can replace their role at all. Rather, the CSM gets introduced at 40%, 60%, and is there because there's the relationship element they need to build and the business case element that they need to understand. And then services can come in and kind of learn the detail and do the scoping pre-sale as well. But I think, if we go back to that philosophy in poor man's nursery rhyme, making sure CS doesn't have to do a handover from services 3 months later is better for the business, but also much better for the customer experience. So I think it's not an either or. I think it really should be both, as long as it's well orchestrated and clear to the customer up front who does what.
So I'm going to hack a question from Laura here to that. So would you separate in that whole process and who's responsible for that? Would you separate out technical integration and training, or would that be running concurrently? or is that kind of dependent on your business model, I suppose?
I think it probably is. I think it depends on the product.
Yeah, and I think the line that I like to draw is, are you going to be named and assigned to the customer for a period of time, or are you a shared resource that we'll bring in for one day or, a 1 week, right? Are you kind of with the customer for a stage of their journey, or are you from a shared resource pool? And that's usually how we'll kind of draw the line as to what buckets we put those groups in. So the integration requires a couple of days work, but they're not going to be with the project. That then would be a separate role, most likely, at least in my experience.
It's very difficult to mobilize staff, and that's like the appropriate staff to the stakeholder of the customer, right? Because customer success, very oftentimes can and should be working with the business stakeholders, the executive, the people that are going to be using the product, talking business language. Whereas, if you're coming into contact with technical stakeholders who do have very pertinent questions, both in the implementation, but also like after a product's been launched, actually being able to map that and mobilize the appropriate resources to have that conversation. Because you can have CSMs walking into, technical discussions. John, we talked about this earlier in the week, right?
Yeah.
In your world, right, you have customer success teams dealing with accountants asking very, very technical questions, right? It's very difficult to mobilize resources at scale when you've got that type of dynamics. And that's why having these two teams working so well together is vital.
Yeah, and it's what it speaks to one of the points that Alex and I always used to talk about is, do you want CSMs who are technically minded and technically skilled or commercially minded? And actually, do you want your CSMs to have the ability to configure their way out of a problem? To the point Alex made earlier on around actually what's your role and getting your lane. So it's an interesting one.
Well, speak of the people who are the technical side of delivery, do you consider PS mainly delivering technical projects close to the product capabilities, or are they more consultants around the core use cases of the solution? That's a question from Patrick.
I think a lot of it depends on the product, in all honesty, and I think it really depends. I think for me earlier on, like I said, the software is not going to change the business. It's just a facilitator of change, right? The people and process has to go along with it. Nowadays a lot of products they're clicks, not code. I remember the fastest implementation we did of Sage People was 30 days from signature to go live on first phase. So for me, I think that in that case it's clearly technical, and then you can throw business change, you can throw transformation on top. So if I'm doing that with ERP and I'm living in that organization for 2 years, it's a very different answer.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a process of elimination, right? Obviously you need services to be technical to deliver with clicks, or you need a role to perform, somebody to perform that role. And then to me, customer success comes with the kind of value-centric domain expertise. Ultimately, the CSM is meant to be the trusted advisor of the customer, which requires them to speak the business language and hopefully, help to connect the functionality and delivery to that business goal. If it's a more complex product, or the organism, it's much more of a change management heavy engagement, then you may bring in professional services teams that are much more business centric. But I would argue to kind of supplement or do the heavy lifting where required for the overall kind of value conversation the CSM is meant to have. So it's really, I think, to the point, it's the option. That's probably kind of maybe the least common, but one thing that we're certainly looking to bring in at Cognite. What part of our software delivers digital transformation to companies in certain industries, and that requires a lot of organizational change, right? And of course, CSMs can't do that themselves. So that's certainly having a technical services offering, and then also a domain services offering is something that we're looking at today.
Great. We're running over, but we've still got quite an audience. So is it right if we just carry on with a couple more questions, guys?
I'm here all evening, team. I'm out of all the jokes that I wrote to perform for y'all today, so it's going to get pretty serious. But other than that, yeah.
I'll be super quick. Kenneth asked, what tactics have you used to manage partners for quality of the services that they deliver?
Good question. So I have, Alex mentioned earlier on, we had the concept of engagement managers who kind of work with teams of of consultants and then work with a team of customers. I actually have a partner engagement manager whose job is solely to monitor the performance of our delivery partners. So she will look at partner headcount, partner skill set, the number of support cases raised via expert services. So, where is their training gaps? Where are their knowledge gaps? Where are they swinging their lead and taking the piss and getting us to do their work for them? We look at project success, so MPS, EBRs, and EBR feedback from those customers, because we make sure we do those EBRs for customers regardless of who they're delivered by. Timesheets. So actually, what are they submitting on time? What's their forecasting like? So there's probably 20, 30 different ways you could go. But actually, the way I try to treat our delivery partners is the same way as I treat my embedded services org. Because actually, if I set them up for success, they're going to do a really good job for me. If I keep them at arm's length, yes, they are separate org. But if I bring them into the family, it's going to be a damn sight easier to make sure that they're working in my mindset, my way, my culture, etc.
Yeah. I mean, just quickly, if customer health is, customer health scoring is something that's, relatively common, however rudimentary it may be. And that data, you should have data for your partner implementations, your partner customers, and your customers, direct customers, I should say. So, being able, again, with data to say, okay, partner X, their customer health score, average customer health score for partner X deliveries is, 10 points below the normal average. And then we use that data to have a conversation and make smarter decisions of kind of who we scope out resources to in the future. So that kind of connects to this idea of customer health scoring that customer success is ultimately responsible for as well.
Yeah, and Patrick, we'll be releasing John kindly provided some partner toolkit guidance, which we'll be releasing as part of a follow-up to the playbook. So anyone who's registered for the webinar will get notified about that. So, and again, big shout to John on that one.
Just because we're overrunning, just some yes or no answers on these ones, guys. Do you always require an SOW when customers purchase professional services?
Yes.
Great. And what are your thoughts on hourly versus a flat fee?
How good are you at scoping?
Politician's answer. And when you're referring to the learning services, do you count that as a separate team or defined role, or a dedicated role?
Personally, I think learning is a specific skill set. So we tried in the early days of consultants training, and there's a benefit to it, but my God, that can be a car crash as well. So my view is they're very distinct. But Alex?
Yeah, I agree. And also I think, learning services, learning and academy teams links quite nicely to customer community initiatives to try and kind of, connect customers with customers to help them help themselves. So for me, it needs to be a separate team that's a central function.
Fantastic. Thanks for those questions, guys. Amazing questions, amazing answers. Jonathan, I'm giving you 30 seconds to wrap this up.
No pressure. No, really good session, guys. So thank you ever so much. So I'm going to try and draw into this a few of the themes that the guys have mentioned. It's funny. I mean, in this old world, or the world of yesterfar, where men wore monocles. That's a Anchorman reference there for you, Alex. Just put that in. The hospital passes between sales and delivery have got to go, right? I mean, I think one of the most dangerous words that we see is this word handover, right? It's very evocative. You're giving something to someone else. I think, I've seen increasingly transition being used, right? How can we transition? How can we lean in and out between these different organizations? What that leads to is less customers repeating themselves, right? Customers repeating themselves on why they bought, what value they want to achieve is not where they want to be. And oftentimes they're in the dark, right, on what they need to do and when during that implementation project. So increasingly, I think the collaboration there is really important. And if you're popping champagne corks at a clunky technical go live, where CS is going to be picking things up later on to repair the damage, that's not the place you want to be in the old world. So I think if we switch into what the best companies are doing now, Robbie, for a moment. So, I mean, I think fundamentally there's an elegance in how they deliver, right? There's seamless transitions between teams, sales, services, and success. the customer is very, very clear on what they need to do and when, which leads to faster time to value. Many organizations focus so heavily on like, what can we improve internally? I know we've done that, and I know I've done that in previous companies. Like, there's only so much efficiency you can squeeze out of your internal team, right? Where companies don't focus is, what's the customer's involvement in this? Simple example. Oh, wow, the customer's on PTO when they were supposed to be doing UAT. You just lost 2 weeks, you know. I talked about mobilizing people, right? I think of it as mobilizing knowledge, right? Whether that's through customer success and services, that has to work together well, because the difference between someone delivering a particular piece of work and their capacity and the time that they can do something based on their skill and knowledge is going to be entirely different between people in your team. And again, all of this has got to be underpinned by some type of like real-time information, right? If you're having to figure out 3 weeks after the end of the month that something's gone wrong, that's too long. And all of that drives scale and allows you to think about this in terms of like, how do we set this up really to make every customer a success story? That's kind of how we think about this. So hopefully, again, today has provided some good insights for those attending. Really appreciate it. Back to you, Mr. Bennell, and you've got a minute.
I'll try and be quicker. Thank you very much, everyone who's attended. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jonathan. Excellent content. And it's all available, not for you to buy, for free in Playbook number 3. Our traditional services delivery is dead, the namesake of this webinar. So do pop to our resources section at precursive.com to download that, to get more in-depth analysis of what we've been discussing today, a lot more data, a lot more insight in there around what we've discussed today. Hopefully this provided some flesh to those bones if you've already downloaded it. We also have many other playbooks that are related to things that we've been discussing today: how to scale with SaaS, with customer onboarding, and managing managing projects remotely on Salesforce, something we're all living with at the moment. Please head over to precursive.com for those white papers as well, the customer onboarding benchmark report that Jonathan mentioned earlier, and look out in your inbox for those future webinars that are still talking about this new world of services delivery with some of the other contributors to the playbook. And I wish you all a very good evening or a very good day, depending on where you are. And thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Robbie. Robbie put this all together. Good work, sir. He's a massive Bond fan, right? So the fact he's managed to squeeze in the fact that this skull from the Day of the Dead scene at the beginning of Spectre. Don't think it hasn't gone unnoticed, Robert. Great job, Robbie.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening and day.